Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Special Committee Police and Committee meeting for May the 28th. My name is Sylvia Ortiz. I'm the chair, and I'd like to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, and if they have something to say, to have a word or two.
Karen Hiller, District 1, Councilwoman.
Lips are getting cold, huh?
Already. That's right.
Mike Padilla, Council District 5.
Thank you. Seems like we were just here. I wanted to start off by saying to the committee, I have received several chain, I call them chain because they're all the same, but who they're from, chain emails regarding chokeholds. As the committee chair, I will continue to say we are not going to rush into any recommendations. We have received your correspondence. We are going to gather all the facts and then bring our recommendations at one time. I will speak for this committee in saying that we are committed to getting all the facts and committed to this research. It's been tedious, it's been long, but we're committed to doing the right thing on what needs to be done. Thank you. I wanted to start out by saying that. I'll call the meeting to order. Next thing I'd like to say is if you have not signed in, if you would please do so. There's a sign-in sheet. Approval of the minutes for April the 30th.
I move to approve.
It's been a motion to approve.
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Hiller.
And I would note, I think that we have some that are slightly changed from what was originally sent out, because I caught a couple of things, and are they, Liz, are the changes in what we have in front of us? All right. Just wanted to make sure everybody knew.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so it's been moved and approved, or moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. It's 3-0, Liz. Thank you. Next is the continued discussion on recruitment. I know that was our last thing that we discussed, and I wanted to make sure that we had enough time if anybody else had any more questions. I know Councilman Padilla would like to speak on some of the things that he's been involved in, and I didn't know if you wanted to share those with the committee or not.
Well, briefly, and Sergeant Cobb was on a Zoom along with me and Sergeant Campos and Barbara Stapleton from GTP. And we were talking about the aspect of recruiting where, and Sergeant Campos brought this up, where it's really been a much more holistic approach, as I understand it, in your recruiting efforts. It's not going out and trying to recruit Captain Holton on his own, that you're looking more at him, his family, his situation where he is now, if he is from out of city, out of state, and presenting a much bigger package of the city of Topeka, then really looking at how they see the police department functioning in the community. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Are there any real new ideas that came out from that Zoom meeting? I know that Barbara said she was going to get back to us, and I don't know, have you received anything yet?
I have not.
Okay. Have you got some thoughts on our conversations that we had that day?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is how significant the internship is. We're able to hold it a second time. It got canceled last year due to the pandemic. But I think it's pretty unique in American law enforcement. I only know of one other agency that's done anything remotely similar, which is Portland, and my understanding is they don't do it anymore because the way they ran it cost too much money. But we are bringing college interns in from all over the country, and we're selling the community to them. We're selling the department to them. We hired, I think, 5 of the last 15 or 16 interns that we had. And these aren't just people that we filled spots with. These are people that moved to Topeka and Shawnee County. So we have to get on Wikipedia and I think raise a population, which I think is pretty neat. That's also one of the goals with it is recruiting talent and diversity. And sometimes we have to travel and go find that talent and diversity and bring it back.
You mentioned the intern program, and I really want people to understand to what extent the team goes out and presents the city in a positive way to our candidates, and the vetting that you do as well with those candidates to make sure that if there are questions they have about not just the job but the city, that they're addressed somehow during your internship program. And how long is that internship program?
It's a 4-week internship program. So basically, I know historically at the Topeka Police Department, the internship has been a college student who can get some college credits for doing an internship with a law enforcement agency. And in my experience, they would be assigned to maybe a detective or a supervisor and help file paperwork or help with data entry. And what we were finding was we weren't hiring those interns. I think it was actually the opposite. We were probably putting a bad taste in some of their mouths. So we decided to completely flip the script on the internship and decided to start selling the department in the community. So they start out with department history. We give them a tour of the city because these people aren't from here. So we show them everything the capital city has to offer, and then on day 2, they're on a 10-hour ride along. So this isn't just where we have fun and it's this facade. They actually go out and they see what we do on a daily basis. They do 6 ride-alongs total. They get a tour of the jail. They participate in some of the academy classes. They spend time with, they're going to spend an entire day with CIB. They're going to go over, with our detectives, they'll go over some case debriefs, what a day in the life of a Topeka police detective looks like. They're also going to start the hiring process. Friday, June 11th, they're going to take our physical and written test. They're going to complete their first interview, and we're going to start the background check on them. So once again, the intent is to actually hire these people. So when we vetted our candidates, we focused on the people we thought were seriously interested in a law enforcement career. We're going to do a lot out in the community. They're participating with the Forge intern program, so they have several events throughout the month of June, and we have them registered for all of them. The Pennant Intern Night, the pub crawl, there's a leadership lunch. And we're also trying to sell even the bigger picture community to them, so we're taking them to a Royals game. Because if you want to get someone to move to Northeast Kansas, why not take them to the coolest baseball stadium in the country? That's going to be several hours of their internship. But we've put a lot of time and effort into selling the agency, selling the community, trying to bring talent and diversity here.
And is there a point during that internship program that the candidate's family is included some way, virtually or somehow? Or?
Well, at least with the last internship, we spoke with family members. It's not uncommon to have either the family of an intern or a potential applicant concerned about what their son or daughter's interest in a career field may be. So we spend a lot of time talking with those friends and family members. I think the biggest concern that we get is the job's too dangerous, or I don't want my son or daughter to be killed in the line of duty. And I think the cliche response would be to overwhelm them with statistics, and instead we take the approach of the type of training that we do. We are the tip of the spear when it comes to training. We talk about our facilities. We talk about our police academy being almost double what the state requires. Then we talk about the 6 months that they ride with a field training officer, then the additional 6 months where they get intense supervision from supervisors on the street during that probationary period. And then we just talk about the family that they're joining and how we have each other's back. I've actually found that helps kind of put those worries to ease more than to go over statistics.
Mm-hmm. throughout the process, and once, let's say, you have somebody in the internship program right now, right? You said some are?
It starts
getting-
Tuesday.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a support system component as they continue through the process? I mean, you do a lot to get them to take on the job. And sometimes, and you and I both know this, it doesn't turn out to be exactly what you expected it was going to be. So maybe a couple, 3 months into it, you're wondering or struggling. Is there a support component to those candidates so that their issues or concerns are addressed?
Yes. Any potential applicants, even the interns, when the interns leave here, we still keep in touch with them, even if it's just on more of a friend level and not so much a professional one. So we'll check in with them, even if we know they're not going to end up getting a job here, or they may not be interested in law enforcement. When we go back to those universities and visit for the next internship, or if we're going to do a traveling test there, we've had, like when we went to University of Southern Mississippi, we had one of the interns that saw us walking and came up and we talked for 20 minutes. But I have all their numbers in my phone. It's been a while since I texted the interns from 2019, but we do keep in touch with them.
Well, that's good to know. And I often hear, and I think it's an assumption people make without really knowing the demographics of the police department, that why aren't we hiring more people of color? And I know it's my observation from my experience with the department but it looks like now, it looks way different than when I started. It was considerably more diverse. And so is there I don't want to get into a numbers game about, we should have so many of each ethnic group or whatever, but do you feel confident that the diversity is being addressed both in the makeup of the recruiting team and the candidates that we're drawing into our program?
I think that we are. I can just take the most recent academy that started 4 weeks ago. There's 9 of them and 4 are minorities. And that's actually from a broader group. A lot of people in the hiring process were eliminated. We ended up with 9. Also, like the universities that we recruit at, just for our internship, we go to Fort Hays State, which is surprisingly above average on the diverse chart, or the diversity grade that they scored. Same thing with University of Southern Mississippi. Sometimes if we just put a sign outside the door and say we're having a hiring test today, that talent diversity may or may not walk through the door. So that's why I'm big on going out and finding it. So we go down to Mississippi to find talent in diversity. Mississippi is almost 3/4 female enrollment. They also have a 29% black student population. So we go there to recruit because that's where the minorities are.
Well, it's good to hear, because that has been a question that I have had posed to me is, does the department go to historically black universities? And I told them yes. And it's good to have that reinforced by your comments.
When we had a historically black university participate in the 2019 internship, and they gave us 3 interns.
Okay, good. Thank you. And I think that's all, Madam Chair, unless there's something else, Sergeant, that you would like to add.
I think really the significant thing moving forward is that we have to stay competitive. I think for many reasons that we can all probably throw a dozen out there. There's fewer applicants to draw from right now, and we have to be more competitive. Our applicant pool is now an applicant puddle, so if there's less applicants on the table, we have to find ways to be more competitive so they don't go to other agencies. Things are just different than they used to be when you were hired. Things are different than when I was hired. We have to work really hard to get one person hired, and the more selling points that we have, the better. And unfortunately, I don't know if it's a generational thing or if it's just current events, applicants are chasing dollars. They'll leave for $1 an hour. they'll enter another hiring process for $1 an hour. And I'm not asking to be the highest paid department, but we do have to stay competitive.
I appreciate your comments, and I don't want to step on any toes, but I do think it's a generational thing. Because when I started, the money really wasn't, I mean, it was helpful. Obviously, you have to raise a family, but it was a commitment to the profession that seemed to draw most of our applicants in. And the status of law enforcement was at a much better level at that time, too. And I think that's a thing that has to be taken into consideration, because I like your analogy that your applicant pool is now a applicant puddle, because I think that is the case, and everybody's fishing in that same puddle. The thing to do is to remain true to what you want to recruit to the Topeka Police Department and who you want. Those people who have a commitment, and hopefully that once they get here, they'll like the community, the department, and stay. So thank you for your efforts. I appreciate it.
Councilwoman?
The only comment I have, which I sort of brought to the meeting, but it really fits with the recruiting as well, as I too have had some side conversations, not anything as formal as your Zoom call, but having been an employer myself and hired for years, as well as attending the same kinds of trainings and so on about HR and hiring and workforce as most people in this room have as well, I'm reminded, and I have been reminded, that whenever you do no matter what people say about money, and at the hiring time, and I'm not saying money isn't important, but when people are asked to honestly rate what's most important to them about a job, it has to do with being valued in that workplace and feeling like that they are working in a place of excellence.
Correct.
So that their contribution and their role and status in that is of value. And I loop that back to this discussion about recruitment, and what you're doing sounds so good, because they're getting an opportunity to get inside a real opportunity to feel what it's like to be in the TPD, any police department, but TPD in particular, and then linking them into the community as well for that environment. Do I want to live there? And we went through, and still are as a city, this whole issue of the starting in around 2000, the rise of the creative class, and that the millennials were looking for where they wanted to live first, and then looking for a job. And I don't think that that's gone away either. And so what you're doing is really playing into that, and it puts a responsibility on all of us to make sure that this community is a place people want to live and work. And then it draws me back into the work that we're doing here in this committee with you, and in reacting in that police and community interface, to make sure that the department we have is excellent always, so that whoever these potential recruits are want to come work for that department as well. And that's why we're here. But I guess it highlights it for me that if we want to get and keep the best and brightest and that diverse force, we need to make sure that our policies, our procedures, our operating routines are the best they can be. And I know that we've worked at that, but we're talking about whether change is appropriate and being cutting edge so that we're what they want. Are there any particular things that have come out of your experience with those interns that we could, from their reactions to you, that we could work on? Any answer being okay, and
Yeah.
not, that wasn't
I
a trap.
understand.
It
That's
was
okay.
feedback.
Well, one thing that, we're barely scratching the surface. There's so much that goes into trying to sell the department in the community.
Right.
I can sell Topeka to anybody. I can sell our department to anyone who's interested in law enforcement. I just have to ask them a few questions first. Because when I ask them about their family life, what their interests are, once they start giving me that intel, now I just tailor my recruiting presentation to fit. I say, well, Topeka's going to be great for you, and here's why. And I just start meeting with it's too easy, especially when they're young and motivated. I think the tough part is retaining them. We have a 39% attrition rate just since Sergeant Hayden and I were hired in 2006. The last time I looked it up, the national average is 15 or 17%. So we're really struggling with retaining people. I have a roster here of everyone we hired since I got hired, and we hired 300 since 2006. 117 of them are gone. That makes it tough on everybody, on the department, the community. So I agree with you, the department has to be excellent. In my opinion, even with current events, recruiting's easy, especially if we're willing to pay for it, because it costs money to recruit talent and diversity. But if you send Sergeant Campos and I to these universities all over, we're going to hire people. We're going to hire, I hope, 5 of these 11 interns. That's the easy part, even though it seems tough. It's keeping them past that 18-month mark, 60-month mark.
When I grew up, and others can respond, speaking of changing generations, I mean, people went into a job with the expectation that they would stay with that, not only that career, but that company for their lifetime, and they would retire from there. My dad did that. A lot of people's families did that, I imagine. And that has changed radically over time. But we really, really need that in policing. Maybe we need it everywhere, but are you getting a sense that we're bucking a new norm in terms of people not expecting to stay long? Are we losing them, I guess, is what's behind that question, or is it just that's the way things are these days, that people move?
Well, in my personal opinion, I don't mind if someone only plans to stay here for 3 years or 5 years. It's not uncommon to have someone in the hiring process that says, well, I want to start in Topeka and I want to go to KCMO, or I want to go to the feds. I think that's great, because one of 3 things is going to happen. They're going to go to the FBI, and we're going to have an FBI agent somewhere that started in Topeka, and they have those roots. Or they're going to stay. They're going to actually stay in Topeka, because even though I think it's great that they want to be an FBI agent, if they spend enough time with me and the rest of the team, they become part of the family, they're not going to want to leave. So that's why I agree with you. It's important that the place has got to be excellent. And I know I can name a dozen officers right now that probably didn't plan to stay, and they're still here. So
I know a young man in 1999 who had every intention of going to the federal level and became part of the team, and the outstanding training that was here, and the ongoing training and opportunities, and people that are truly interested in you and your opportunities and your profession. We have people that we work with and work for that are interested in my profession in this agency, and I made the decision I'm not going anywhere. And here I am almost 23 years later.
So that was you?
That was 100% me in 1999. I was a college graduate.
You got stuck here?
I didn't see it as being stuck whatsoever. It was just being young and ambitious, and knowing that this agency, because I did my internship here. I did it for an entire year, my senior year at Washburn. And that alone started to change my dial a little bit on this pie in the sky federal career. It was still in the back of my mind, but I don't see it as being stuck at all. I see it as this place was contagious. It's progressive, and it still is. And that's part of that retainment that the sergeant is talking about. Is we got to stay on top of that, because you'll have folks like me that are thinking one thing and quickly decide something else. And here I am talking to you folks today.
I tell people that that's fine if you want to be here for 3 or 5 years. I just need you to be the best cop you can be. And if we get 3 or 5 amazing years out of you, that's fine. Just don't forget about us. But in that 3 to 5 years, it's going to be my mission that they're not going to leave. So,
It's awesome. You done, Karen?
I agree.
but it sounds good. It's not always true, though. It doesn't always play out that way.
Well, and you know, we're at the risk of bringing up another a minefield. You know, the residency issue comes up, and I've been supportive of dropping that requirement. But the corresponding to that, either way, is we have to have people want to move here, and so that fits as well, whether we keep it or drop it.
Awesome. So I have a couple of questions. Were you done, Karen? Okay. I have a couple of questions before we move forward. How many interns will start on Tuesday?
11.
11?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
And then how many do we usually keep after that? Or do you know, it just varies, or?
I hope to hire 5. We did an internship with, I think, 14 in 2019, and then we had 3 additional that they weren't, because of the way their semester worked, they weren't able to participate in the full-time program. So we ran the same curriculum, but over a several-month period. So essentially, they did the same internship. It just wasn't consolidated into the 4 weeks. And of those, so that would be 17 total, we hired 5. I hope with this 11, I hope we selected the right candidates, and we're just going to press hard and do everything we can to sell the community. But at the end of the day, it's costing the department the salaries of the people who are participating in it. My salary, Sergeant Campos' salary over those 4 weeks. In my opinion, if we hire 1 intern, now we add up the salary and benefits, and what did it cost us to hire that person? And then we ask ourselves, would we write a check to hire 15 more? A lot of this, it's just the salaries that we're going to be paying regardless whether the internship's here or not. We're just kind of diverting our resources to it. But a lot of people have come out of the woodwork throughout the community to help make this possible, like the Ramada Inn donating rooms for 4 weeks and breakfasts. The Citizens Academy ambassadors gave us money for lunches over the 4 weeks. Councilman Duncan said he's going to cover some meals. CIB lieutenants are going to take them all to lunch the day they spend with them. Sergeant Campos and I are covering meals. Right now, we're covering the Royals game till I can find a way to pay for it. So it doesn't cost the department a dime. We're just making it happen. And then we look at our return on investment. Like when Sergeant Campos and I go to the University of Southern Mississippi, my best guess is it might cost $2,500 to send us down there for 4 days. When you add in gas, salary and benefits, the hotel room. But we've hired, I think, 4 from USM. So if you take the money that we've spent going down there, 4 candidates, then I would ask the chief, if it costs us $800 to hire someone and bring them back to the community, would you just write a check to hire an academy of 15 at that same price? And if the answer is yes, then we have to keep doing it.
All right. I too feel that we need to maybe have a discussion on how to keep them, because I do know that the millennials, boy, they will switch careers in a heartbeat. I've seen it done at my job. And I'm like, where are you going? They don't even care. They'll just go. And I once heard somebody say they're not afraid to take that chance. Me, I have to be. No, I have to be stable. I have to be set. And so we do see a lot of that. But that $1 difference, or that little bit of benefit just might change the whole world for them,
Well, one thing that we try to be careful of is whether it's true or not, we try not to make it a generational thing. Because technically I'm a millennial. I know chiefs and sheriffs that are millennials. They're 38 and 39 years old.
Yep.
And
You're who I'm talking about.
right. So I don't want to alienate any recruiting hiring pools, and I actually think now these 21-year-olds are the the next generation. But in my opinion, at least what I've always told people is if nobody's applying at your agency and everybody's leaving, it's not a generational thing. You have some problems that you have to sort out. So we have to identify, if we think it's a generational thing, we have to identify that generation's purpose and what makes them tick, and we have to show them how that's what they're going to get from our agency. And it just goes back to the selling point. If an applicant tells me they want to be a cop because of Mayberry, I'm going to sell them Mayberry, and it's going to be Topeka, Kansas. And if someone wants the big city because of a show or a movie they watched, well, you get that in Topeka, Kansas, even though it's kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum. So we just have to find what makes these candidates tick and sell that to them. But then we have to follow up with, we keep selling it to them, we keep reinforcing it, and we check on them, and we show that we appreciate, the job that they're doing.
Thank you.
I do think it has shifted. I mean, I've been through my parents' generation, which was career, and then well, I want to say it was in the 80s when all of a sudden, and I was a nonprofit director, so community-based and nonprofits was, and government was my circles, where it was, oh no, I need money and I should have a private office and amenities. And it was really shocking because it was such a switch from the 60s generation of just doing things. And then we've had the millennials that wanted to change, but really what I sense right now is, and it's probably a generation something or other, but I don't keep up with that, but it's the pay it forward generation. I mean, the be kind, which has really been, I think, gone up and down throughout our culture, our U.S. culture, and certainly here. Hopefully that's something that can play into, whether it's just being kind, being involved in the community, and paying for the next 3 people behind you in line at McDonald's or whatever it is.
I really love looking at the research, and I think that we learn a lot from the research, and the research says exactly what you're saying, especially with the
New
pool that's coming in now.
Good.
And I think the research all shows that it comes down to purpose. But in my experience, regardless of the purpose, people's bills are going up, and it makes it a tougher sell if we're not competitive with the other agencies around here. And we can still do it, and it works. It's just always I'm sure it's just always gonna work out. But I'm just afraid it's gonna get tougher and tougher if we're not competitive. And then we can say, yeah, the pay, this is your pay, and it's competitive, and I can show them other agencies' pay, and we can go over the benefits. But if the research shows it's more about purpose, we can just knock the pay out quick. Yeah, we're competitive, we're in the top 3 in Northeast Kansas. All right, now let's move on to the purpose part. But it's tough when I try to move on to the purpose part and the pay's a hang up.
Do we do anything like a interview, an exit interview, and let them write down why they're leaving or any of that? Do we do that?
Well, I think that we do.
Do we look at that?
We do, and a lot of times it's handled through the city of Topeka HR to give
Okay.
it a little bit of distance. We've done it that way, and of course we do it now internally too to try to gauge some of that information because there's invaluable information that
Right.
as to why.
Right.
So yes, we do try to gather that and get a handle on that.
Okay.
And also, in my experience with exit interviews, I don't know how much weight to give them because number one, we don't know if the employee was being honest. Number two, if they did the exit interview the day they left or 6 months after they left, or the answer is going to be the same. I'm actually a fan of a stay interview. I want to ask Captain Haltom why he stays, and I need to be taking feverish notes. I need to ask Sergeant Hayden why he stays, and I need to take notes. Not only am I going to make sure that we reinforce the reasons he said he stays, it's probably true with our other employees. So bigger picture, we need to make sure that we're focusing on this stuff, because if someone says, well, I'm leaving because of the pay, all right, well, we're in negotiations right now. Whatever pay we get, it's going to be for the life of that contract. I can't just say, all right, well, we'll pay you more. But if it's something with the work environment, or if it's something with a benefit that maybe isn't contractual, that's an easy fix. So,
But I do think there's some merit there with whatever they say. I like your stay interview as well, but I think there's some merit there. Because a lot of times, you know, people, they do look for other employment because of the frustrations that they have, whether it be pay, their supervisor, the way that it's ran or whatever. And I think, when you read that, you know, you might not think that they're being truthful, but if I read the same thing 10 times, there's going to be some truth to it, you know? Like the chief is just a bad dude and he's crooked. And if I read that like 10 times, come on, you know? And so that's why I look at that and I say that I'm sorry for picking on you, but you know what I'm saying, that there's always some truth to that. And I know with the state, you know, people are afraid to come forward, and even people that still have their jobs with the city because they want their job and they
Right.
don't want to be let go, you know. But I think that stay interview is also good because, you know, this gentleman just told me why he never went anywhere. I thought he got stuck, but he's happy where he's at, you know. And so that you can kind of weigh both of them. And I think just looking through the lens, as we say, is just a different opportunity to give you guys just something more to say, hey, it's a pay again, it's a pay again, it's a pay again, it's a training thing, it's a training thing, it's a training thing. So I just think it's a good tool. Okay.
Yes, I agree.
Any more before we move on? Yes.
I've just got a couple things.
Okay. You are a good guy, you know.
Say
I
that
didn't-
louder into the mic.
I knew it was
This
an
guy's on TV.
example, hypothetical example, I'm sure. I got you. No, I just think that it's great. We had an opportunity to have Sergeant Campos, now Sergeant Cobb. I think it can't be said enough, and so I like the opportunity publicly to say it. We have a fantastic recruiting team. And I don't just say that because they're in here and they do a great job. They've been internationally recognized. Sergeant Cobb was invited to talk about recruiting efforts here at the police department at the International Association of Chief of Police Conference a few years ago. So for him to say that the internship program here in Topeka, Kansas, he only knows of one other place that did it, and maybe they're not even doing it anymore. That's what we're talking about. Those kind of things that need to be brought to light about how good a job we do, and it's all about the people. And with anything you can get from Sergeant Campos and Sergeant Cobb, they're both very invested in these recruitings, and that's not something that you can buy, in my estimation. It's about that kind of conviction, and so that's what I wanted to say is we have a fantastic recruiting team because of the people, but we are not the only ones who've recognized that. And up to the international level, coming to Topeka, Kansas, to figure out how we do recruiting and as to how we move forward. So I just love his attitude in regards to that, because that's what it is in law enforcement. Every challenge is an opportunity, and you have to look at it like that because there's always going to be challenges. So I think they do a great job, and I just wanted to say so publicly.
All right.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you for coming today. Okay, the next, we're going to move forward, crime reduction strategy and drug take-back program.
Matt, you're welcome to stay, but you certainly don't have to.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll just sit here unless somebody wants me to step up to the podium, but once we get the
No, you're
PowerPoint
fine.
loaded up here for Liz. And I appreciated the opportunity from the committee to talk about this, about crime reduction efforts in 2021, because this when I'm out in the public in the new role, meeting a lot of people, they ask me about my priorities, and the crime reduction strategies is one of the top priorities that I have. And I know when I talk to people about that, I get lots of follow-up questions about what does that mean. I mean, everybody understands the police department is involved in reducing crime. But we wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about how we do it. It's not simply just driving around and waiting for someone to call 911 and then respond to that crime. So I think we wanted to talk a little bit about that. Well, that's the wrong one, Liz. Yeah. That's just a little one we're going to do at the end here. Or maybe it's the right one. We sent it to you. Well, we can just kind of wing it then, I guess, as far as that goes with the slides. But it was the one from last, if that helps. The last meeting that was set, that was pushed. This was the last agenda item on the previous meeting. We can do the drug take back thing real quick if you want to bring that one
Yeah,
up
let's
while
knock
Liz.
that one out. Let's knock that one out.
Yeah.
Knock that.
While Liz is looking for the other one, we can throw that one back up, and Captain Haltom will transition into that one.
Doesn't like that one either.
Now I don't know how much, you're gonna need the clicker for 3 or 4 slides, but yeah, it'll be short.
You want to present it?
At some point, yeah.
So we'll have Captain Halton talk about the drug take-back program that we have at the police department.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on kind of a service that we provide to citizens, and it also enhances our safety as well. So in the lobby at the Law Enforcement Center, we have 2 receptacles that are available to the public for safe disposal of pharmaceuticals, prescription medications, and then sharps as well. Just a line here from our policy 6.1 on the procedure. The police department, it is the policy of the city to provide safe disposal for prescription medication and sharps to the public. Like I said, these containers are located in the lobby, which is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, right next to the public access records windows. You see the one on the left there, that's the container that holds the pharmaceuticals or prescription medications for disposal. The one on the right is for the sharps. One of the advantages of this is preventing those prescription drugs from ending up in our water supply. As we know, when we don't have a method of proper disposal, a lot of times they are improperly disposed of, such as poured down the sink or flushed down the toilet, and then we all know that that can end up in the water supply. But even bigger picture, though, this is a way of combating crime in our community, because if those prescription medications that are Schedule I narcotics, something along those lines, those have value outside of their intended use, and those can fall into the wrong hands if not properly disposed of. So we reduce seeing those things end up on the street in the wrong hands, being distributed in places and folks where they shouldn't be, as well as accidental access to children, things like that, in the home as well. So this is an opportunity for citizens. It's not open to commercial entities to come and drop off, massive amounts of pharmaceuticals that have either expired or are no longer in use, but it's for the citizens to come in and properly dispose of those items. And just to take a look back over the past, we're on year 4 now of this program, but in total we have taken in 4,101 pounds of pharmaceuticals in those 2 receptacles in the lobby. So that is quite an impact when you think of what could have happened if some of those ended up on the street being sold or distributed, and or in our local water supplies. Any questions on that?
I have a couple. Does this include liquid as well? Somebody had asked me that. Liquid, like if they got cough syrup and it's outdated?
So
or,
things like cough syrup can be disposed in there. There's a couple no-nos, things that are under pressure, like aerosols, and then a thing that we'll see commonly are the inhalers. A lot of people will dispose of expired inhalers in there, but those are under pressure also, and they can actually be combustible during the disposal process. So those are a couple items that are not accepted in there, but liquids are.
okay. I just want to say, I wanted to highlight that we didn't participate in the drug take back, but I talked to the chief about it, and we have this 365 days a year, which is awesome, because I have a lot of elderly that ask, what do they do with their expired or, sometimes they change medication. That didn't work, and so they still have medicine. So I just want to publicly thank you for having that in our lobby. And I want to thank you from the point for youth, because there's been parties of youth that they grab, medicine and they throw them in a bowl and they're taking them and they're doing whatever. So I just want to publicly thank that.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for that. And hopefully this will be highlighted, that people will see that they can take their drugs down there if they don't know that. Yes, Councilwoman.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the sharps, because once the drug piece went in, I remember talking with the chief, because in my neighborhood anyway, it's citywide and it's not just central, but when there is drug use around, or people are wanting to do neighborhood cleanups, they run into needles and sharps on vacant lots and properties and so on, and they're nervous about picking them up, and they're also nervous about what to do with them. And so adding the sharps box, which as I recall, Chief Cochran did and funded it out of some funds that you all had available for intervention, one-off kind of intervention things. I was thinking when I looked ahead that there had been a chart about how much had been returned through the sharps box as well. Is that getting used very much?
Yeah, the sharps container and the MedSafe container, both are being used a great deal. Our narcotics supervisors have to check that thing almost weekly to make sure that we haven't reached capacity and it's ready to do a safe disposal of both containers. So both containers are being used on a regular basis.
Have we done much marketing about those lately to the public or to neighborhood associations, or through the various cleanup efforts that have gone on?
I think that's exactly what the chairwoman's point of bringing this back was. We're aware of it, and it's been a few years since we did the implement, but I think bringing it back to the public's attention now that things are getting a little bit more opened up and people are doing a lot more, because you can see the numbers were down for the year, and a lot of that has to do with COVID and people being out. But I think that's exactly why we took the opportunity for this committee to do that, and we'll follow that up with some social media stuff as well.
Good, because even during COVID, one of the things to me was that was the logical time to do cleanups, because you're at 6 feet apart anyhow. Throwing stuff into a dumpster or a bucket, and people being aware. It was after that went in that it was brought to my attention. I think Walgreens has them too.
Right. There's a number of locations now too, but the police department is definitely one of them as well.
Well, and the fact that it's safe and that you can come there and be reasonably safe and supervised when you dispose of them, so you don't have to worry about somebody tracking you back or whatever, I really like about the fact that you all are hosting that, even if there are other places. And so, I'm not sure what the conversations have been with Safe Streets lately, but they seem to be working more on at least establishing,
Neighborhood watches?
Neighborhood watches and so on, and the alerts about that, about the drug and the sharps disposal.
Yeah. I agree with all of you. I think the natural point of the CPOs being back involved in the NIAs will get the word out. We'll do some more social media on it, but maybe we had gotten a little complacent that the community was aware of it because we've had it for a number of years now. But this is definitely a great opportunity to kickstart that again and let them know it's still there.
Thank you, because I think if your numbers are that high and it hasn't been talked about very much, you may have to check it more than once a week.
It's a good problem for us.
Thing.
Yeah, it's a good problem for us to have, because
Yeah.
prevention on the front end is what we're all about.
Absolutely. Certainly is for me, because again, those things attract each other, just like broken windows do. If it's there, thank you.
I agree.
Thank you.
Mike, you good?
I'm good.
Okay, all right. You good?
I am good.
Any more discussion?
Sweet.
All right, next.
Liz, are we ready for mine, or are we going to go with something else? Okay.
Liquor exchange.
So crime reduction strategies, and how do we get where we go, and how does the police department and the chief and the command staff sort out where we put our resources to best reduce crime in the capital city, which is obviously our primary mission. I want to talk a little bit about that. some broken down points of how we do that. We have some internal units within the police department who have specific tasks that help us form our strategies based on numbers and statistical trends in crime that we see, geographical areas and those kind of levels of concentration. I then have some slides that I want to show you what field operations, which is obviously the most obvious piece of the police department, the black and whites, men and women in uniform out in the streets. And then, of course, the Community Outreach Bureau efforts, because there is no crime reduction strategy. And I know all of the council people in attendance have heard me say this many times. There is no effective crime reduction strategy that doesn't incorporate community outreach efforts, because if your community doesn't trust you and they don't talk to you, then you can't be as efficient as you possibly can be in reducing crime. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll highlight some multi-agency collaborations that we have and talk about the great relationships we have with our local prosecutors at all levels as well. So what we do every 2 weeks, the big nexus of our push on this is essentially the crime strategy meetings. And what that is it happens every 2 weeks, and all the command staff meet. We meet with the crime analyst unit and the criminal intelligence unit. They also have members of Crime Stoppers, the sheriff's office, the district attorney's office, and the media team for those agencies as well are at that meeting. What we look at is basically the what, when, and where as far as crime data that we have for the previous period of time and trend presentations on that. The way that these two components work together is criminal intelligence is basically, crime analysis just does the statistical data. Number of car burglaries in this area at this time of day and night that help us focus on our manpower allocations. Criminal intelligence tries to augment that with the who. Or the what may be involved, people that we have that are arrested or identified through intelligence sources that may be involved in criminal activity. And we try to overlay those two components together so that when we put our officers or our detectives or our undercover personnel or our technological resources all in an area, that we are there to combat a specific crime trend that we're seeing, but also that we have some intelligence-laden information over the top of it about who may be involved to make us as effective as we can be. Those collaborative meetings are one that I think is really kind of shows what the police department is all about and how we work with our partners and how we deal with these trends. And the reason why it's so important to have the sheriff's office and the DA's office there is criminals don't really care about the jurisdictional lines. They go where they can commit the crimes and where there's opportunities to do so. So we all have to be talking back and forth across jurisdictional lines on these trends to make sure that we're combating it all together. The goal, of course, is to make it more effective in response and make sure that we're doing the best and the most effective and efficient use of the resources and the allocation of police manpower that we have to make sure that we're being as effective as we can in the capital city. And I spend a lot of time working on the processes and the operational efficiency because that's one of the priorities that I have, because we have to have that communication internally across the bureaus and across all these units to make sure that we're guiding the men and women on the street to do the work that we need them to do in the community to keep us all safe.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
When you say senior command staff, does that include community policing?
It does. That would be all of the bureaus, commanders that are involved, and it would be all of the captains and majors, and of course the chief and the deputy chief as well. So all of that would start out from the hierarchy of the top of the bureaus. But every bureau is involved, every unit has representation at that so that we make sure that we get all the 360 view that we can of the crime trends. And big part of that is to also make sure that we make the responsibilities delineated out as to who's going to follow up on this issue and who's going to follow up on this issue so that we have then accountability, which we'll get to as we move through this presentation, on the back end. Because it's not just on the front end of, okay, we have a vandalism problem over here, or we have a gunshot call concentration over the last few weeks in this area. But how are we going to address that with field operations personnel, with detective support, with community outreach support to bring all of those resources to bear on this problem? And then do we follow up on it as those meetings occur every 2 weeks to make sure that we are making an impact, that we measure it so that we're doing what we think we're doing with it and we see numbers down. A great example, I know, is a social media piece we put out, and I put it to the council too, on the catalytic converter thefts that were at a high at the beginning of the year. We made it a focus throughout, and that was across all bureaus. Great work by detectives, great work by field operations personnel, and we knocked that all the way down to the month of May, down to 1. So that was a great example of how we use the data to tell us where we need to put the resources and make sure that we have the intelligence that incorporates to focus it where it needs to be focused. And then you have to have the accountability on the back end to make sure that what you thought was being done actually is represented in the numbers. And it's not always just the 2 weeks. I mean, we might talk about the same crime issue for 4 months, 3 months. It's the constant pressure of keeping it on there. If the numbers stay where they are, then we're going to continue doing what we're doing. It's when we see the drops that we move on to other things. And that's the concentration piece that I wanted to get out. There's a lot of slides here, and I'll move through it fast, but the general view that I wanted to get out to the community and to the members of this committee is how we do what we do, that it's not all reactionary, that there's a lot of data that we gather, and how do we use that? And how do we make that be the most efficient use of the resources? Because we have to be smarter and better and more effective with our resources, because we don't have as many resources as at one time that we did. So the crime analysis unit, just a couple highlights. This is the people, the civilian staff that we have that go through all of the data collection, and they basically identify these areas of the day-to-day crime trends that they see. They bring it for those 2-week meetings that we have, and then basically we dole out those projects. They also provide community support. They field requests for various agencies about different kinds of data for grants, or all kinds of different things for community groups, for long-term and short-term projects. They keep us in compliance as far as the colleges in the area have to have different reporting for national levels, and of course they do the reporting to the KBI of our annual crime stats quarterly, and that then end up in the FBI national report that is our data as well. So they do a lot of work, and they're a very important part of it. And I know a little bit about that because that was a group I supervised for a period of time as well. The most effective way for this to work is to have that crime analysis unit, the numbers people, work hand in hand with the intelligence people that has the information to parole, probation, active subjects from intelligence, people that are arrested, information that we gain from those interviews, all of that overlaying the top of the numbers trend. So like I said before, the simple analogy is the analysis unit is the what is occurring, and the intelligence unit is the who is occurring. So they work well with them. They have a lot of levels of responsibility. The criminal intelligence unit is governed by that policy that's listed there, 4.19, but they basically have a hand in everything that goes on in our agency, because they basically are the ones that are the ones that connect the dots. When we see information that detectives have over here and information that community officers gather from an NIA, and how does those two things overlap, they're the ones who send out the bulletins. They keep the information, and we do a weekly bulletin that keeps us involved. So they're the connective tissue, I like to say, between the brain and the arms, the troops in the field, the intelligence information that goes out to them. So they have a lot of responsibility, and those two units are the key players in that crime strategy meeting that we do every 2 weeks, because they give us what we need to know, and then the command staff doles out the assignments and does the accountability piece on the back end to make sure that the resources that we're allocating are providing results that are tangible, that we can then share with the community.
If I can do one follow-up now, because I know you're speeding and I
Sure.
see what's coming. Again, this community policing and prevention, not just crime reduction, but prevention is a real key at the neighborhood level. So let's say we have a house and there's needles and stuff around. It appears to the neighbors there's drug activity. There's sketchy people riding bikes with backpacks, coming and going all times of day and night. Nothing's happened yet. Nobody's been hurt, but they're looking in cars people are worried. And so they're asking for help. So the goal in that case would be 0, that nothing is happening now and that we don't want anything to happen. Is that ever one of the kinds of goals that is set in this team?
Well, that would be harder to measure, because
I know,
this is definitely driven on crime trends. But there would be the intelligence center, the criminal intelligence unit, is where all of that information goes through. The telltpd.org, all of that information goes through. All of the intelligence that we gather from all of the different places runs through the criminal intelligence unit, so that they have kind of that overliking view of it. So there would be the potential on a narcotics tip that you got there, that it would be coming
But again,
forth to us.
there wouldn't be any statistics yet, because nobody got arrested, nobody got busted, and nobody broke into a car yet.
Sure.
And so the idea is that the number is 0 right now, and that people want to keep it 0.
And I certainly love that goal. But yeah, that would be very hard to measure from a statistical model if there's no crime.
And that's one of those scenarios, though, that I've heard the chief in those meetings countless times when if we discuss like those tell TBD bits of information that come in, and maybe our criminal intelligence unit brings something up that's connected with something else, and the chief runs those meetings extremely efficiently, and he'll point across the room to Lieutenant Badel and Lieutenant Cross, and he'll say, "Hey, you got that? Get your people out there and see what we can do on that," because they're in charge of the community policing unit. So there is a piece to that where I guess that prevention side comes into play, and it usually.
We try
So
to
she get the phone calls up?
Well, we try to identify. I don't think it's all the
I'm
numbers.
serious.
I don't think it's all the numbers. I think it's the intelligence piece that you're talking about. So when we identify, say, an active car burglar, we would begin an operation of a proactive level to deal with that car burglar. Now, if that car burglar happened to be the person who was at your house that hasn't generated any crime yet, then potentially we could get to that situation. So, in this hypothetical area, it's a little murky, but I feel like we're addressing proactively and getting ahead of the crime trends that we do. We know statistically we have a small amount of our population that's in charge of a lot of the crime, and so I think if we direct our resources there is the potential to stop that. I certainly think we prevent a lot of crimes. I would tell you that those are hard to measure statistically too, but I would tell you from my experience that a lot of times black and whites driving around with police officers in them prevent a lot of crimes. Now, how we quantify that is a little harder to do.
We can pursue it later, but you know where I'm going with it.
Well, I have it written down right here. Actually, one of the things on my notes is exactly what you've said in this meeting several times. It's exactly what I'm talking about. Crime reduction strategies is our business. Community outreach is how we get to be the most effective that we can. But your viewpoint that I've heard several times on what community outreach is always that there is a portion of that goes back to, are we reducing crime? Are we making the neighborhood safer? They love, like I've heard you say on a number of occasions, they love you're meeting with me and having ice cream, but are you catching the car burglars in my area? Are you catching the people that are breaking windows or leaving drugs in open fields for kids to find? I can assure you this, that's what we care about. That's what I care about making us as operationally efficient as we can. And we will get out in front of these things, but we have to use the statistics and the intelligence overlaid on that to guide our resources at a big level. At the individual officer level, there's a lot of things that can be done. And I have I said before, the community officers plugged back into the NIAs is a big thing. It gives us that one-on-one stuff that we can do at the neighborhood level. This is more how we guide the entirety of the resources, but I'm 100% with what you say in regards to this. Every one of the community outreach meeting pieces that we do has to have, for me at least anyway, a crime reduction piece to it. Some of them are long-term though. What we do with youth outreach is harder for us to quantify, but we all know from a common sense standpoint it's going to help us down the road. So that's what I would tell you is I think it's, and I wrote that down.
And we can keep working on it, but that net zero goal, if we're at zero right now, whether it's these kids that are in trouble and we don't want, then our goal is zero. And it's not a reduction, it's not a satisfying, it's something that already happened that we're chipping away at. But, if we can work both ends against the middle so that if it's clear that there's stuff going on in some house and nothing bad happened yet, to wait till somebody gets shot is a shame.
No,
And
I get you.
that's the feeling on the street, and it just, I think it's possible to quantify it, but we've not done it yet. It's that net zero goal.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and we've had a lot of sideline conversations about the most important drug house to a neighborhood is the drug house in their neighborhood. The most important drug house to the police department is the drug house that supplies the drug houses in several neighborhoods. But as we get back to the community policing foundation, we also have to understand that we can't lose sight of that optic, that perspective, that the most important drug house is the one that's there. But we do have to have some statistical data to guide us on a general level. So I understand, and I think it's a healthy skepticism to say
Nobody wants to be that neighborhood where we leave it alone while we go after the big fish.
Sure. You're right, from a purely statistical data, if there's zero crime in this neighborhood and there's 10 crimes over here, we are putting our resources where the crime data shows us that it's at.
That's my pitch.
Yeah.
There you go.
I understand. I think it's a great discussion. We would like to be everywhere at all times and keep it all 0. But this is how we get to what we do with the resources that we have. So this is I want to touch on the field operations, and I know we've kind of done through that. So that's how we do the meetings. Now, what's the next step? Once we dole out these projects and we see where the trends are, this is what results in this. Field operations, as you can see, this is kind of a breakdown. They've done 31 projects, and this is probably a month or so old because we had this on the agenda for a couple times, but it gives you kind of more of an overview of what they're doing. What crimes are we addressing? What trends do we see? Gunshot areas, property crimes, traffic safety enforcement, which I know we get lots of different things. We even had the trail downtown bicycle path stuff that we did as well. It just kind of gives you an overview of all of the different projects that we do, how we try to address the crime trend data, and how we try to address it too. And you can see this is very important, I know, for the council and for the community as well. The geographic area of the projects. 8 were citywide, in which, like, for example, fugitive apprehensions. That's going to take place all over. But otherwise, you can see 6 in Central, 6 in North Topeka and Oakland, 6 in East, and 5 in West, which we think is a pretty good division of that, especially when you overlay the 8 that were citywide. So I just wanted to give the community at large and this committee kind of an example of, okay, so once we identify a problem, what are the kind of projects where we're rolling out the resources on? And this is kind of what that looks like. That was to date about a month ago, and we've continued those projects. So this is the end result of all of those meetings and that analysis and us figuring out where we want to go and what we're seeing in the community. Community Outreach Bureau. This is going to be, I knew this was going to be one of her favorite slides, because this is the Community Outreach Bureau. And although they do a lot of community outreach events, here's also the initiatives that they have done successfully to deal with the problems that they have been notified about at different meetings and or neighborhood improvement association meetings and retail businesses and et cetera. So here's what our Community Outreach Bureau does while they're also doing the community outreach projects they do. It goes through property crime initiatives, both business burglaries and also drug arrests and gun arrests that they made. As we know, a lot of the criminals do a diversity in a lot of different crimes. They're not just one specific kind of crime. And the drugs, as we talked about with the drug take-back, drugs are an underlying cause for a lot of our crime. Retail business is very important to us, relationships we have, so we've done some operations. The CPOs especially do a lot of work with the business community to try to address their concerns and problems that they have, again, have resulted in a lot of felony drug and gun arrests. Surveillance operations, they get tasked to help out a lot of the other units, from the homicide unit to the narcotics units in different surveillance things, and also criminal intelligence. They generate a lot of information from these NIA meetings and from sources in the community that they develop, and they funnel that all through the criminal intelligence unit so that we can make sure that it gets to the right places within the agency, is exactly kind of what you were talking about. And then they've obviously been involved in some fugitive apprehension operations as well. So it's important that we have different bureaus that do different things, but we all kind of overlap when we need to, out of necessity for the resources that we do. But I wanted this slide to kind of demonstrate that while the community outreach officers do a lot of amazing community events in the community, they also do a lot of fantastic police work as well, which I think is appreciated by the community on both ends of the spectrum. Multi-agency collaborations. A lot of press that we got recently was the Operation Frontier Justice we had with the marshals that landed all of those statistics and arrests. 258 total arrests, 138 of those are felonies, 24 firearms, 18.9 kilos of drugs, and 25 grand in currency that we did in a 10-day operation because we have fantastic relationships with our federal, state, and other local law enforcement agencies. It got us national attention, and here's the other reason. We have traditionally seen, and I know statistics aren't everybody's favorite thing, but we have seen over the last several years a spike in crime in May leading up to the summer months. So we were very strategic in the timing of when this operation took place and tried to blunt some of that historical spike that we've seen in violent crime by this, and I think you'll see that when we have we're headed for the next quarter here next week on June 1st, and I think you'll see that in the quarterly crime stats coming out, that this operation was a great piece of a 10-day operation that we were able to do. So this just highlights how important it is to have relationships with our partner agencies. We have federal task force officers with ATF, FBI, United States Marshal Service. We have a state task force officer with the KBI. I get this question a lot when I'm out in the community, you know, what all you do. And this is one of the great pieces, too, of our recruiting team. This is part of the retention. And I think the deputy mayor can talk to this, too. The ability to go and do different things within your career and your agency. I look at the officers we have here, and we've all done, including myself, we've all done a lot of different things. And that is an important piece of retaining your people too, is can they continue to advance, can they continue to do in different areas? And having these different federal partnerships where people can do task force positions and experience that at a different level is a big retaining piece that we need to hang on to as well. Obviously, it helps us operationally, gives us additional manpower and resources, prosecution, and as we saw with Frontier Justice, I mean, we had a whole bunch of manpower. Do you remember what the total number was?
I think over the 10-day operation, total people involved, not on any given day, was in the 90s.
Which is for a community this size, well, for a community any size, that's a pretty good drop in of manpower too, and that's just not something you can accomplish without having the partnerships that you develop. And obviously, you get a lot of operational and intelligence, tactical information from them, and developing those kind of working relationships just makes sure that you're where you need to be from a tactics and a policy standpoint too. It gives us, those federal task force specifically give us access to federal prosecution, which for criminals involved in higher level drug and gun violent crimes gives us a little bit higher penalties than the state level has. The KBI task force specifically is on the Child Victims Task Force. That has been a great thing. That has given us access to agencies and information all over the state, and just the intelligence information collaboratively that they have been able to produce is something that's very impressive, because a lot of those things were fairly siloed in local agencies. And again, as we talked about, especially in this age of internet crimes, there really aren't any geographical borders. And so having state and federal partners is the only way to combat some of those crimes.
Trafficking is included in that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they also, it's that KBI partnership is a great partnership for us too, because they also work a lot of cases here in Shawnee County, Topeka area too. So it's not just you gave somebody off; they're giving you back. You get some of the caseload out of it too, along with the other things as well. We have a great relationship with the sheriff's office. The sheriff and the district attorney and I meet once a week to talk about issues that we have going on. One of the first things the sheriff did was form up the Shawnee County Drug Task Force. You all see the headlines that they get from 2 or 3 times a week on the multi-collaborations they do on different search warrants here in the city and the county, and just a great use of repetitive resources. And the piece that really people don't understand that don't work in this is how those agencies working together, the intelligence information that they share kind of organically because they work together. When they're working drug cases together that overlap, now because that task force is together and they work with each other on a daily basis when they're doing warrants, they know what each other is working on. And so they're able to collaborate the resources. So if they're already working on something, then we don't duplicate resources and then realize that we are at some point too. So it's really a good working relationship. The Registered Offender Program has been a big thing for us for a number of years. And we have recently, and this is kind of another thing that we're doing to keep the young officers that we have engaged and energized, is we've done some fugitive apprehension training programs with the sheriff's warrants teams, with our people, to give them information on how to follow up from a patrol standpoint on subjects that have active felony warrants. You're developing your detectives, you're developing your investigative skills, and more to the point, as far as I look at it, from succession planning, not only from our agency, but for this area, is I'm getting a lot of young sergeants and commanders who are going to be the future of our agency and the sheriff's agency working together, so that they develop those relationships that'll take us through for the next 10 or 15 years, because I definitely want to leave this agency better off than I found it. So those are just great. Go ahead, Mike.
Quick question, Chief, and Karen kind of touched on it when you mentioned trafficking, and these are all great relationships going on. And I know in Topeka, we have Topeka Rescue Mission and the YWCA. They have in the past, I think, continued to work on programs with regards to trafficking, because it does happen.
Absolutely.
And are they meshed in somewhere in this kind of work so that they too have the opportunity to share what intelligence they get from the people they serve through their empowerment? I can't remember what they changed it from.
Center for
Center for Empowerment.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are blessed in this community to have a tremendous relationship from a law enforcement standpoint with a number of community groups, two of which you just named. We have great relationships with them, and they do referrals and intelligence information to us on a fairly regular basis. So I think we have a great relationship with those agencies, and you have to.
You were asking if they're involved in the meetings.
Well, not so much in the meetings as they are as you develop intelligence, and intelligence may cross paths of what they're trying to do and you're trying to do, that they're sharing it so that one hand is helping the other, and they're not independently trying to get things done to address trafficking. Sure. Because it's just something that keeps popping up, and Topeka is unfortunately located in the center of this country, and is a traffic way for a lot of that activity. And whatever we can do to support law enforcement's efforts and utilize those other organizations that also serve that community who have gotten caught up in that. I just want to make sure that there's a communication string going on there, and not necessarily, like you say, at the meetings, but they know something, they feel comfortable coming to you and working with the agency on addressing those issues.
Yes, absolutely. I understand your question. They are, to be clear, they're not at the meetings because this is a different format for that. And they have their own rules in regards to what they can release and those kind of things. But we have a tremendous relationship with them. They have, like I said, those are ongoing conversations that have been going on for a long time, and I feel like they're a big, significant benefit to us, but also to them. So while there may be some differences in the mission in regards to the victim services versus the investigation, those things are certainly things that we work around. Our special victims unit has a lot of conversations with those parties on a regular basis.
Good, thank you.
Again, great prosecution efforts we have with the district attorney's office, and some of the things that we've advanced to make sure that our operational efficiency, and by that I mean responsibility and accountability, are at as high a level as we can have. The district attorney's office, one of the things they requested, they do case presentations on all the homicide cases where they sit down with the actual prosecutors, go through the evidence of the case before the charging decision is made. That's just a great relationship building and learning experience for both the detectives and the prosecutors. And the DA recently asked for, and we moved forward with this, we're doing the same thing with the special victims cases, because a lot of the statutory penalties with a lot of those cases are very similar to the homicides, and so they are very much on an even keel with a major case squad. So we've expanded that to those case presentations with the DA's office for those special victims detectives too, which is just a great not only relationship building but an experience level, and to make sure that we have the accountability for those cases being done at the highest level that we can to make the community impact as great as we can. The district attorney's office, like I said, has a great relationship with us. They provide training in our recruit academies and in our continuing education. The district attorney has made himself available for roll calls and other things, and I've even done a few in-service things over with his staff. And so the communication and the teamwork is the key for everything that we do. Go ahead, Mike.
Another question.
Sure.
Sorry. And I know that the DA is very involved with TBD and making sure cases are put together.
Yes, sir.
And I remember, it seems like a couple of years ago, they established a cold case unit there, and even one of the retired TPD officers, Detective McLaughlin, I think, was hired for that.
Right.
Does that unit still exist? And Are we seeing some results from that?
Your information is spot on as it always was, but yeah. Yes, Detective McLaughlin, the DA actually hired him. He's a district attorney employee, but he's embedded at the police department with our investigative bureau, and his sole responsibility is the cold case. I know that they've recently had, and I know Ryan might be able to help me a little bit. I know they recently had at least one cold case that was directly a result of charges being filed directly a result of that investigation. And I'm sure the district attorney would be able to speak more about the totality of the statistics, but that detective is embedded. In others, he's in our detective bureau every day. That's where he reports to work, and his sole purpose is to identify and go through those cold cases. So that is very much still an ongoing thing, and I'm probably not doing it justice with the success it's had, but I know it's had at least one or two convictions, and that's a great resource because as we've been talked about a number of times, cold cases in this community are very much real for the families that are impacted. And they're very real for the investigators too. But to have somebody's the district attorney to make it such a priority that they hire somebody, and especially somebody that has the experience that Detective McLaughlin has. I mean, he was a detective for us for a long time. To do just that be their sole purpose to do it, is a level of dedication and commitment that is really a benefit to us. And like I said, I would love to be able to follow up and tell you what the statistics are, but I'm aware of some amazing successes they've had. It's really been a big benefit. And those cold cases are important to the community. They're important to us.
You know, something you said really strikes me, that those cold cases are almost like family cases. I mean, it's the city here. And people sometimes think that because nothing's happened, that people have forgotten totally about their incident and the person that they lost. And I think it's very important that you maybe give a quick presentation sometime along the way on the success and the effort of that unit, because I just think people just don't know the extent of how much attention is given to the work of something as serious as a homicide or rape or anything like that, and that it just doesn't go away. Somebody is still looking at it. I just think it's really important because I know from my experience, I had a couple cases there that we just kept beating on, and then the family just really appreciated the fact that people hadn't forgotten their loss, and that we had enough of a interest and a heart in their loss that we continued the effort. So maybe somewhere along the lane, Madam Chair, we can have a bit of a presentation about that cold case, because I think I don't know if it's unique to municipalities, but I think it's important to highlight here for Topeka.
I think you've been looking at my notes because I've had some conversation with the chief on that.
Once a detective, always a detective.
Yeah. And I actually was very pleased to get Chief Wheelis in this position because he was a detective. So I met with him, and we will do that. We will do that.
Thank you.
Because it's real, and there's a lot of people out there that are wondering what can be done because they feel like they've been forgotten. And Chief Wheelis has called a couple people for me and to let them know that we haven't forgot about you.
That's good.
So, point well taken.
Yeah, 28 years in, and I've done a whole lot of different jobs, and I can still tell you the cases that I have open, that I was the lead investigator on. And I know I'm looking across, Ryan Hayden was a fantastic detective for us and before he became a sergeant. And I don't know how we can state it to the community. We live those cases. I mean, the homicide detectives and the major case squad detectives choose to be that because it's a calling within the calling. So we live and breathe those cases. We miss events with our families. They understand the sacrifice, but we don't forget, I guess, is the short version of it. And we want to solve every single one of those. So I'd love to do a presentation on that. I'm sure we can get that done.
Let me see the rest of your notes.
No.
All right, yeah, that was the final slide on crime reduction strategies. If there's no questions, I think we can move through with whatever's next.
Okay. Well, we thank you for that. Liz, make sure you put a bulletproof by that.
Able training from Sergeant Hayden, I think, is next
Yeah.
on the agenda.
Before we get started, I just want to make sure, our ABLE training is going to be a little bit lengthy to the committee, but it's very well needed. I think a lot of our constituents, and we've received a lot of concerns regarding this subject. So we'll see how far we get today. And then if we have to continue on our next meeting, we'll do that. So I don't want you to rush. I want the committee to make sure that you get all your questions answered. Because this is, just something that's been highlighted to this committee.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll do my best to be brief and thorough, and we'll answer all the questions that we.
Okay, we appreciate you.
I'm gonna stand up if nobody. I need to stand at a microphone?
Oh,
You can come up here to
Or
the,
speak very loudly.
Is this good enough?
The problem is the people online.
Okay, I will go stand over here, but it won't be as exciting.
Tape your feet, tape
Well,
your
you
feet to
could
the
probably
floor.
hold one of these and wander around with it.
that won't be exciting either.
So my name's Ryan Hayden. I'm a sergeant with the police department. And I got involved in the ABLE program, active bystandership for law enforcement. After it kind of came to our agency, I was not one of the initial instructors, but after I saw the program, I wanted to get involved. So when they had a call for some more instructors, I put my name into the hat and was one of those chosen. So I've been doing it for 2 or 3 months now. There was a big push to get it out to all the rank and file and all the commanders as well. So that was a big push, and now it'll be integrated through the academy as well as new guys and gals start to come into the department. So we will start going through this, right? So the ABLE program itself, there's nothing necessarily new or groundbreaking about the whole program, but it is a potentially a new way of looking at things and a new way of helping some officers understand how to do some of the things that we should be doing, right? There's always been a duty to intervene, right? And we shouldn't even have to write that down in our policies, right? But sometimes what has been lacking is, well, how should I intervene, right? What should I do, right? So this is a big thrust of this program, right? And why is that important, right? It's obviously important to us and our officers and the people that we work with, and nationally, officers everywhere, right? It is there's no doubt about it. It is a trying time to be a police officer right now, and we are all under the microscope. So that comes with its own responsibilities, right? But it's also obviously important to the community and the individuals that we come into contact with, because it is such a symbiotic relationship, right? So if the community's view of the police starts to spin out of control, right? How effective are we, right? And then as we start interacting with the community, and then potentially, if they question our authority or any officer's authority, right? What kind of relationship does that cause, and how does that start to spiral out of control, right? Because an individual officer might take that the wrong way. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, right? So an officer might take that the wrong way and overreact, but on the other end of the spectrum, an officer might not quite necessarily understand how to deal with that situation and let things get a lot farther than they should be. And now we might even be in a worse position, right? So all these things come into play, and that's some of the things that we are trying to fix, right? And part of this is the bonds forged by this profession, right? It is very much a brotherhood. You hear that word a lot, right? But there's a lot of things that police officers experience that nobody else experiences and nobody else should experience, right? And that's part of what we sign up for. But it can be hard, right? So that turns into we do things for each other, and we go when somebody calls, right? Now, some of that has been turned into some of these stories you hear about, this blue wall of silence, or I'm going to cover for somebody when they did something wrong. Now, I can sit up here and tell you that I've never seen that, but I know that it happens. Right? So the thrust of this program is, okay, so instead of being that loyal that you're going to cover something up for somebody, why don't you be so loyal that when you see it start to happen, or even get an inkling that it start to happen, you say, hey, wait a minute, let's not do that. Let's do something else, okay? So that's an important piece of this. And in that vein, right, the best person to do that is going to be another officer. They're going to understand the situation. They might understand some of those dynamics that are present there anyway. They're going to understand perhaps what's going on in another officer's mind, right? And then probably one officer is going to be the most receptive to get that information from another officer. So it's important that we all learn about it. Right, so what exactly is it, right? And the training consists of three main pillars, okay? Reducing mistakes. Mistakes being, I knew probably what should have been done, but in the moment or for some reason a mistake was made, right? Behind that little bar there, it says preventing misconduct. That's more probably what a lot of people think about as far as police misconduct. You knew it was wrong, but you did it anyway, okay? And then promoting health and wellness. So fixing some of the underlying causes. We're not just going to treat the symptoms. We're going to treat some of those underlying causes. What are some of the things that are making these things happen in the first place? Right, so really that's just going to prepare us, hopefully, going through this training is going to prepare us to understand exactly what's going on, how to notice those things and come to terms with those things, and then how to act, how to react to those things, how to intervene. Because that's really, again, that's one of the biggest factors that we were probably lacking on to begin with, right? And not just how to do it, but how to receive it, right? Not to just shut it down, which a lot of cops and tough guys are probably wanting to do, right? So that's another big thrust of it. And Dr. Irvin Staub, he is kind of the main creator of all this. And he has been a researcher for many, many years, right? He's a Holocaust survivor and decided to devote some of his life to studying bystanders, the bystander effect, what makes people do something, what makes other people not do things, why do some people step in to stop things and some people just stand by, right? So his definition of a bystander is really just anybody who may or may not witness an event or be involved in an event, and they are in such a position that they could step in and do something or say something or some other action that might stop some sort of harm. Right, so ABLE essentially is about empowering people to intervene and giving those strategies how to do it, okay? And then giving an understanding of how to receive such an intervention, and then hopefully empowering in a culture inside your organization that says, hey, we're not going to hold it against you if you do, right? Because that is something that a lot of officers are fearful of, right? And whether that's true or whether that's something that we are all just seeing in the movies too, right? We watch the cop shows and we watch the cop movies, right? We have some misunderstandings about how these things work too. Right? It is not about potentially racking up a whole bunch of paperwork for internal affairs or disciplining a lot of people or getting into any kind of legal mediation or extra reporting. Hopefully, if this is successful and people understand the concepts, it's about, I'm going to cut this off at the pass way before any of this stuff is needed. Not that we are covering anything up, but that we are going to stop it so early that none of this stuff is going to be necessary. All right, does anybody in here have any guesses as to what the first real big successful peer intervention program was, kind of nationally? Any ideas? Nothing? All right. Friends don't let friends drive drunk.
Oh, that's right.
Okay, right? When this kind of campaign started, right, the media and researchers were pushing out all kinds of information about, hey, don't drive drunk, silly. You're killing people. And people dying from drunk drivers, them being drunk themselves or killing other people was through the roof. And they started this, kind of ad campaign that changed the mindset. It was like, well, hey, listen, you're not going to listen to me, so I'm going to empower your buddies to tell you, hey, knucklehead, it seems like you've had too much to drink. Don't drink and drive. And all of a sudden, there was a big shift. Sorry, it wasn't just the newspaper telling me I shouldn't drive drunk. It's my best friend telling me I shouldn't drive drunk, and now I'm going to listen and say, oh, okay, well, you're probably right. And it was very successful. Some other successful bystander programs, right, and this is important just in terms of, in our particular arena, it's important, I think, for officers to understand that, hey, we're not getting singled out here. This is hard for everybody. It's hard to have these kind of conversations. It's hard to have these conversations with my wife and my family, right? Sometimes you just don't want to get involved, right? But other places where this has seen success, right? Airline pilots, right? They had problems for years for air accidents happening, entire plane loads of people dying, right? And it's just because the captain was in charge of the cockpit, right? And people had problems stepping up to the plate and saying to him, hey, I think we're about to run into that mountain, Bob. Maybe we should stop, right? And why does that happen, right? So that was a big thing there. And they went in there and they enacted some programs that said, hey, you know what, that authority doesn't run all the way through the plane. You can tell somebody to maybe these things are headed down the wrong track, right? Same with operating rooms, right? Again, inside that operating room, there's a hierarchy. And sometimes nurses and other personnel inside there were afraid to tell a surgeon, hey, I think we were supposed to cut off his other leg today. Okay, I noticed what you were doing, but I didn't say anything till afterwards, right? Or I didn't say anything at all. I just let it happen. And again, they put this kind of stuff in place, and it really helped them out. And then on the right is college campuses, right? And that all stems around sexual assault, right? Not letting your buddies make some silly mistakes when it comes to sexual assault and consent and all those kinds of things. Right, so again, we have to, you don't have to sell this to officers, but they're going to want to know what's in it for me. Why is this important? And really, that should be pretty self-evident nowadays. If you turn on the news, again, we are under the microscope. If you don't think that we probably need to change some things or reevaluate some things, you aren't paying attention. Right, so obviously there's plenty of risks to policing, right? Physical and physical danger is, the one that everybody thinks of the most, but that the mental baggage that comes with the job, nobody really thinks about, right? They kind of touch on it in the movies and all that stuff, but you cannot really understand what that is until you start doing the job. So part of this program is realizing and at least verbalizing what some of those things are. We're all going through the same thing. Some of us deal with it differently than others, right? But suicides kill more police officers than anything, okay? We should be, right, dying in the line of duty, and that's the only way that we should be dying. But by and large, we take our own lives a lot more than we die in the line of duty. And why is that, right? And a big part of that is probably primary and secondary trauma. Primary trauma being, okay, I have been in a violent event, or I've experienced a violent event, or I've witnessed a violent event. Those are pretty easy. But secondary trauma is something that we probably don't think about, but is probably even more, prevalent, right? Most officers will go through their entire career without necessarily being in a real violent encounter or killing someone or shooting at someone. But every day of the week, we go out there and we are exposed to secondary trauma, and that might just be hearing over and over again violent encounters that other people have been in, okay? And seeing those emotions that they are displaying, relating their experiences. We have to process that. We have to put that somewhere. And a lot of times we just kind of shove it somewhere and we pretend that it doesn't bother us, and it's really just building up over time. Okay, that added to a lot of the other things that go with the job, shift work, lack of sleep, and all those things. They're going to build up over time. It's going to lead to chronic stress, and that might start to show itself in some of the ways that I treat other people, some of the ways that I treat people on the street, some of the ways that I treat my family, and that's all going to become part of this equation of how I am on the street and how I react to people and the choices that I make. Right? So I might get a little bit hypervigilant. I might react to stimuli that other people don't think is a big deal. And that's all just kind of stuff that I am carrying around. My wife gets mad at me because there's a ever-growing list of places that she can't go in town, right? Because I responded somewhere and I said, oh, guess what? You can't go there anymore, right? And that's on me. That's stuff that I carry around and stuff that I worry about. But everybody deals with it to some degree, right? We have statistically higher levels of depression and again, higher levels of suicide, right? And probably part of that is our unwillingness to admit some of the things that are going on in our heads, potentially not necessarily knowing where to go to get that kind of help. And then in the lines of suicide, right, we don't necessarily want to talk about those things, and we have easy access to things that we can take our lives with. Right? All these things, again, they would just kind of tend to spiral out of control, right? And if I don't commit suicide, but I have some of these symptoms of depression, is that some kind of bleed into everything else that I do? Right, so what's in it for me? Right, I'm going to have to stand a little bit closer so I can read these things real quick. But again, we are trying to combat these three main pillars, right? But I'm going to reduce some mistakes, hopefully, right, which is going to prevent some death or injury in the line of duty. That's going to prevent some disciplines and some investigations, right? If I can prevent some misconduct, I'm going to hopefully lessen criminal prosecutions against police officers and any lawsuits that are going to cost the city any money, right? Derail any careers, right? And then on the health and wellness side, right, if I can reduce some of these stress-related issues and suicides, we're going to have healthier officers and they're going to be there longer, right? And you're going to notice that on the bottom of these, right, harm to the family is hopefully something that we're going to reduce across the board on all those pillars. Because we, right, there is a tendency of a lot of police officers to, home life kind of takes a back seat to the job sometimes, right? And if you aren't prepared to deal with that, that in turn affects your career, right? Because now my home life's not going well because of my career. And now I leave the house and I'm mad because I'm fighting with my wife and I'm going to carry that into the job. And it's just going to come back and forth, right? And I tell every academy that I talk to that you have to take care of your family because someday the job's not going to be there one way or the other. And hopefully your family still is, right? Because they're going to be the ones that are going to be your calling, right? They should be your calling during your career, but there's a lot of police officers that retire and they were so identified with the job that they retire and they don't know what to do with themselves and their family's gone and they die within 5 years, right? Heart attacks and stress-related injuries. So family is a big key component to this. Right, so why does it work? It's first important to understand the two types of bystanders, at least in the ABLE system. Passive bystanders really aren't doing anything. They're just a witness to the event. And because passive bystanders, passivity usually breeds passivity. If I don't see anybody else doing anything, I might not do anything either, okay? But if I see some active bystander principles, if I see somebody doing something, there's a greater chance that I'm going to get involved in that too. Or if I know that that culture exists, I'm going to do it anyway because I know somebody else is probably going to step up to the plate to help me out. Right, and that's very powerful just in integrating that into an agency, and so they understand, right, hey, I'm not going to face any repercussions for doing something like this. There's a culture for this. It's expected of me. If I don't do it, I'm letting everybody else down. And if I do it, somebody else is going to back me up. Okay? Right, so understanding some of the science that goes behind some of this, because it's easy for me to sit up here and say, yeah, I'm going to do the right thing every time. Right? But in the heat of the moment, maybe through no fault of your own, really, the right things don't happen. And why is that, right? So there's been plenty of experiments that look into these, and they've been replicated over and over again. And we'll touch on them briefly here, right? I always feel bad for the people in these experiments because they think they're coming in for one thing or another, and it turns out they're being studied for something else, and at the end of it, it's like, oh, hey, guess what? You're a jerk too, right? So some of these are, I would find, pretty embarrassing, right? So one of these experiments, they had these college students come in, and they sit them down in a room, and there's an intercom in the room. And they are asking them questions about their experiences at college. And through that intercom, that particular experimental subject is dealing with other people that they believe are there. Sometimes they think there's only one person that they are talking with. Sometimes they think there are multiple people that they are talking with. And sometime during that experiment, they hear over the intercom what sounds like one of the other people that they are dealing with having a seizure, right? So now the impetus is on them. Do they do something or don't they, right? They don't understand that that's what the experiment is for, but that's what the experimenters are watching. So what do you think? If they think that they're the only one there, does that raise or lower the percentage of them doing something? If there's a bunch of people there, do they reach out and do something, or do they think somebody else is going to do something? That's right. The study kind of bears out that the more people that are involved, the less somebody feels like it's probably their responsibility. Oh, somebody else is probably going to do. Somebody else probably heard that, right? Somebody's going to do something, okay? So that plays into what we do too, the diffusion of responsibility. I'm not the only one here. Somebody else is probably going to do something about that. Somebody who knows what's going on. Maybe I don't really understand what's going on. Okay? Pluralistic ignorance. Well, nobody else seems to be doing anything, so this must not be as big a deal as I think it is. So I'm not going to do anything either. Okay. Another one is kind of similar, right? They bring in some college kids and they say, hey, there's kind of a different breakdown of what they tell these kids, but basically they say, hey, I need you to get across campus. You're going to give a brief speech about the seminary. These were primarily seminary students. You're going to give a speech about seminary and some of those job prospects in the future, right? And then they tell some of them, hey, take your time. There's no big hurry. You get across campus, and when you get there, you're probably going to have to wait anyway. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's, hey, you are already late. Get over there right now, right? And it is planned out in such a way that when they go through campus, they're going to come across somebody who is in obvious need of help. So then the measurement is, if you're in a hurry versus not in a hurry, what are those percentages bear out? So what do you guys think? If I'm in a hurry, am I more or less likely to help somebody out? What's that?
Less likely.
Less likely, that's right. I'm in a hurry. I might not even notice that something is happening, right? And so how does that relate to us, right? There's always a time component to our job. If it's not the call holding screen, it's we show up and things are happening at a very rapid pace, and maybe we can't see everything anyway. We start to go through some of this as sensory exclusion, and maybe we don't notice some of those things. Right, Stanley Milgram is another, his parents were Holocaust survivors, so he got into researching bystanders, right? And his main thrust was when all these Nazi trials started, a lot of them were saying, hey, I was just doing what I was told, right? And everybody thought that was pretty much baloney. So he starts this experiment. And basically what happens is a couple of people show up, but everybody's in on the gig except for one guy, okay? And he becomes the teacher, and everybody else is involved, and one guy becomes the student. And the student goes behind this closed door, and they make kind of a show of hooking him up to these electrodes, and they say, okay, teacher, you are going to ask this guy a bunch of questions, and every time he gets one wrong, you're going to press these buttons and give him a progressively higher electric shock, right? So the question is, and these electric shocks go from very minor all the way up to the final button that has like a skull and crossbones on it, okay? And then before they did all this, they theorized that less than 1% would actually go all the way to this end button, right? But the measurement is how much authority does this simple guy in a lab coat, how much authority does he have over this person that he is telling, it's really important that you just keep going with the study, okay? Because as he starts pressing these buttons, the guy behind the wall, he's not really getting these electric shocks, but as he gets higher and higher, he starts to scream out in pain. He starts to say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to leave. And then as they get even higher, he stops making noise back there, right? So how many people do you think, what percentage of people do you think went all the way and pretty much within an hour were convinced to kill somebody. Any percentages? 50? About 62% went all the way up to the skull and crossbones, pushing that button, just because the authority that guy held by wearing a lab coat. And he wasn't a doctor or anything. And he had only a few key phrases that he was allowed to say. It's important that you continue, right? Stuff like that. And why is that important to us, right? We are not necessarily out there doing that sort of thing, but the authority and rank structure inherent in our kind of paramilitary organization makes it hard for some people to say stuff. What's a rookie say to his field training officer when he sees something that he doesn't agree with? That's a pretty hard barrier to overcome unless you understand that you can do that, and here are some of the techniques that you should maybe try. Right, and then Irvin Staub himself, he had some experiments, right, and it's kind of in the same vein as these. Two people in a room, they hear something in the other room that sounds like somebody is maybe hurt, right, and then kind of the two big variables here are one person turns to the another and says, hey, that sounded pretty bad, we should probably do something, and then they kind of just look back down at their newspaper, or hey, that sounded really bad, we should probably do something, you go call 911, I'll go see what's going on, right? Something like that. So that bears out that me just telling somebody to do it might not, or me just making that suggestion might not be enough. I might need to delegate that responsibility to somebody. That's why they changed CPR kind of instructions within the last decade. It used to just be somebody call 911, right? They weren't really getting the results that they wanted because of some of these authority issues. And empowerment issues. And now it's you call 911. You're picking somebody out of the crowd. You're going to tell them what to do. Right, so overall, we need to make a commitment to intervene when we see some of these things, that any kind of potential harm, obviously, especially harm to the community, but harm to ourselves, harm to each other. It doesn't necessarily need to be, hey, you're making bad decisions on the street. It can be, hey, it looks like you're carrying something around. Is everything at home okay? Right? We need to be having those small conversations before they become big conversations. Okay, and right, a lot of these things, why might somebody intervene? I can't really implant any of these things, right? I can't necessarily give you that much empathy, right? If you have come into this job without a lot of empathy or sense of responsibility, it's going to be hard for me to kind of implant that in you. But, right, I can give you some confidence in how to do this. I can give you the idea that the culture is going to support you and that people are going to have your back one way or the other, right? So I can't necessarily implant some things, but I can help people understand some other things. But what might get in the way, right? Because, again, the truth is that we don't really intervene as much as we think that we will, especially when we get into that situation. And why does that happen, right? A lot of it can be fear of retaliation or exclusion, right? A lot of that can be, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not my job. That's a supervisor's job. Maybe I have made some of these same mistakes in the past and I don't feel like I should probably say it because, oh, well, I've been there, right? Maybe I'm just embarrassed, okay? It could be lots of things, and it's just important for everybody to understand what those things might be. And why that might not work out in our favor. We won't watch the videos just to save us a little bit of time. Okay, but if we don't intervene, all those things can stair-step and accelerate into things that are suddenly out of our control. Again, the things that I am carrying around, right, if all of a sudden that bleeds out at the wrong moment and I let it out aggressively, right, that's the worst outcome of all is if I express that angst aggressively against somebody else, that's going to be potentially harm for me, that's harm for the community, somebody could get hurt, that's harm for the police department as a whole, that's harm for police departments everywhere and the community that I'm in. Right, and again, what that harm might be, discipline, legal exposure for the department or the city, and then overall just systematic damage to the profession, right? If I don't really want to be that guy on the YouTubes that is making the job harder for everybody else, right? I am in some sort of situation, and now that becomes a viral video, and now that is creating danger for cops across the nation, right? Nobody wants to be in that position, but it can happen in an instant, right? So that's some of the stuff that we are trying to combat, right? So when and how do I intervene, right? This is the big thrust of some of this training, right? And they divide it up into 3 steps: notice, decide, and act, right? So I have to be able to notice when something is about to happen, because the longer it takes me to intervene, the more harm that is potentially going to occur, right? So in any situation, it comes down to the situation, whatever it might be, and the people that are involved in it. So what's going on there, okay? I need to be able to recognize in myself and in others what kind of emotional dynamic might be going on, right? Because again, I can stand up here and logically think about lots of situations and tell you what I'm going to do, right? But I'm going to bring things into that situation that I'm not going to think about, okay? Whatever I experience that day, what my values are starting out, right? What exactly is happening during that experience, okay? And it is hard for me to stand up here logically and tie all of that emotion to a situation that hasn't happened, right? It's hard for me to understand what kind of emotions I might be under when that happens, okay? And understanding how every time when I'm super happy, my brain dumps a bunch of chemicals into my body that makes me even happier, right? And sometimes I make bad decisions when I'm happy, right? All of a sudden I got a $50,000 sports car, and 2 days later I'm like, why did I buy this? Right? Well, a good salesman's going to probably play you up on some of that stuff, and your emotions are going to take you in a direction that you don't want to go, right? In the same way, if I get super angry, I make decisions that later I might regret, right? Oh man, why did I do that? I was just so mad I wasn't thinking clearly, right? All those chemicals dump into our brain, and it's hard for us to separate that out, right? That's the same reason I don't watch scary movies, right? It's hard for my brain to separate that stuff. All that stuff dumps into my brain, and if you can't understand what's going on, that movie's scary, right? It's the same reason I cry every time I watch The Notebook. It's a happy movie, but all those chemicals dump into my brain, and if I can't separate that stuff out, I can't necessarily determine fiction from reality in my brain, and now all of a sudden I'm in this emotional state that I didn't realize I was in. Right, and so this is common to happen on the street just because of what's going on. All of that chemicals drop into your brain and into the rest of your body as it kind of potentially prepares you for fight or flight. And that could be because I am actually in a situation. It could be because I'm just hearing it on the radio, right? My brain is going to start preparing me for that. And if I don't know what to do with all those chemicals and all the things that are going to happen to my body, again, I might make some decisions that I regret later. And if I understand how that happens and I can see it start to begin in somebody else, I can say, whoa, why don't you take a break for a minute, let me handle this, or let's do this a different way. Right, and then the situation itself. Again, situational triggers are going to happen for a lot of officers. They're going to hear things on the radio. They're going to be exposed to calls that they have had bad experiences potentially with in the past. And some of these things are going to start to stair-step on them whether they realize it or not. They need to be able to kind of understand what's going on in their mind and in their body and be able to separate that out. Right? Notice that something needs to be done in myself or in somebody else. Okay? And then I need to be able to decide to take some action. And hopefully this training provides some of that, right? Because I'm going to notice it. Now it's a simple decision for me to decide that I need to do something, but hopefully they're going to have some understanding of what to do and how to do it, okay? That decision shouldn't take that long, right? And even if after the fact, okay, I wasn't there to intervene before, or I didn't do it for some reason, I can do it now, okay? So I need to make that decision too. And then to take that action, okay? So hopefully, if I can do this soon enough, I can take some preparations to act. I know who I'm going to talk to. I know what we're going to talk about. Maybe I get some buddies to help me out. Maybe I find somebody who's a close friend with that person and they're going to help me out, right? I have a lot more choices the sooner I can get to this, right? Some potential options, right? In no particular order, I could try to distract somebody. If I can see some of these things going down this road, I can say, hey, why don't you let me take care of this, okay? Why don't you go do something else? Anything to that effect. I can delegate somebody else. Again, maybe I pick out somebody that I know has a close relationship with them so they can help out. Maybe they're going to be more receptive to somebody else. Or maybe I'm just delegating it to a supervisor. Maybe I don't really have that much authority. I need some help. Or I can be very direct, which might be common in police work. Hey, buddy, you're screwing up. Don't do that anymore, right? And sometimes that's exactly what somebody needs. And part of this training is some role-playing scenarios. And this is the biggest hump to overcome in all of the training sessions, right? Because now I'm asking you, hey, you're going to come stand up in front of the crowd, and we're going to practice this, right? And nobody wants to do that, right? I don't want to stand here at this podium anymore either, right? But sometimes we got to do those things, and the role plays are important because so I practice all kinds of things at my job. I go through some training how to drive. We go through pretty extensive training for firearms, and it's all a bunch of kind of repetitive motions. So hopefully if something happens in the heat of the moment, I can potentially, reload my pistol without even thinking about it. Well, it's the same thing for these role plays, right? If I sat here and suffered through your 8-hour PowerPoint and I now 2 weeks from now, I know that I should intervene on something here, and all I can think about is, what did Ryan say on that slide? It's a lot different than, hey, we practiced this a couple times. Let me try out some of these techniques. So a lot of times these role plays do become a little more fun than they think that they're going to be, but it's definitely an obstacle to overcome. And then just some more techniques that people will learn about. Something that came up again in the airline industry. Again, they were kind of flying some planes into mountains, and they would listen to the black box recorder, and right, all the bells and whistles are going off in the cockpit, and 5 seconds before impact, you hear the navigator say, "Hey, Bob," right, and there's nothing else, right, because the plane's gone, right. So the airline industry kind of came up with this model that they use, which is kind of a stair-stepping way to do things, right? So I'm going to probe, I might alert, challenge, and then finally, if I need to, I'm going to take action, right? And they've got some examples here. A probe might just be, hey, did you notice that mountain up ahead, right? You saw that, right? Okay. And then all the way up to if I need to take action, maybe I'm removing some of those barriers. Maybe I'm calling you by your first name, or removing some of that rank structure, and I'm like, hey, Bob, that's a mountain, okay? So it's just an understanding of how I don't necessarily have to start all the way at the top. I can stair step this if I need to, and potentially that makes people a little bit more comfortable with doing it. Right, and then after the event, if I didn't get to it as soon as I wanted to, right, I can try to do that at a later time. If I did intervene, it's important to debrief that after the fact. Hey, this is why potentially I did that. Hopefully I did it well. Okay, let's talk about this a little bit more. What caused this to happen? What can we do in the future, right? And again, if you received an intervention, whether that went well or not, what can we do in the future to prevent that? What could I do better later? Right, and if I didn't intervene for some reason but should have, okay, why didn't I? What were some of the things that kept me from doing that? Was it just internal with me? Is that some culture in the environment that I don't feel like I can do that yet? What was that? Let's analyze that. Right, and then what's next, right, is hopefully just a department-wide implementation, right, and we have done that. Obviously, we've pushed it out to everybody, right, but again, there has been serious buy-in from the department, from rank and file all the way up to command structure. The chief sat in one of the particular classes that I taught, and he was there the whole time. I know he's a busy man, but he stayed the whole time, right? Which sometimes you see people come in and out of training because they have various job duties, but he stayed the whole time. He participated in some role plays. He raised his hand and he talked, and that's what people want to see, right? Not just that we are shoving this down the throats of all the patrol guys, but that everybody's involved, right? And that we care for each other, right? And then making some commitments to each other and to the community to be able to do these things and to fix things when we see that there's a problem, because sometimes it's hard to have those conversations. Okay, right, that was pretty quick, and if you guys have questions, I'll stick around and answer plenty of questions if you need me to.
I like that, the world is in greater peril from those who tolerate or encourage you.
That would be today.
Yep. That would be today. Council members, it is past 5, but I don't want to stop. I want to know what you want to do. Do you want to have some questions? Do you want to bring this gentleman back at the, to continue discussion, or how do you feel? Do we want to have discussion, take a few minutes now?
Well, personally for myself, I saw some things up there that I'd like to follow up on.
Okay,
But, so maybe a return engagement by the sergeant.
okay,
And I can even share them with the chair and the chief and sergeant, so that way when he comes here, they'll have some of the ideas of what I'm trying to get at.
okay.
I don't
Karen?
know about you.
Well, I came with one. I have a couple of others with the conversation. It would be nice to be able to just be here in the moment while it's all flowing, but I certainly understand the clock. So, yeah, because I think that the training is addressing what is at the heart of why we're here. And so to be able to explore that further with you and you all as well, both to learn certainly, but to also have that conversation with you, I think is important.
Certainly.
Okay, so we have the slideshow. Everybody should have a copy of it. If you need to brush up on it, we're going to ask you to come back for continued discussion. We thank you for going through that for us today.
You're welcome.
Very good and informative. If that's okay, Chief?
Absolutely.
Okay. Is there anything else to come before? We'll just continue what we have into the next one. Is there anything else before the committee?
I think not. I'm just to send off on this one, it's very reassuring to hear you say that the reaction from the officers up and down the line has been really positive.
It has been.
When
Normally
we
what
ask-
I hear is, hey, we're already doing this, right? And I think that they are right. We are doing this. This is really just helping them to understand why they might not sometimes, and here's some strategies to do these things that might be hard.
Yep.
But, if you probably were prepared with that anyway. I mean, some of the thoughts or the ahas that people have had along the way going through the training, I think would be.
It has been promising, right? I will admit that signing on to talk to a bunch of potential tough guys about some things that are kind of, touchy-feely, right? That's how they're going to think about it at first. When they walk in the door, that's kind of how they might feel about it, right? And that was something to overcome for me as well, right? That's not real easy for me to get up and stand up and talk about those sort of things. And here's some of the things that we need to do. We need to open up about some of these things that we bottle up, right? That's not really easy, but they've been overly receptive. And even some of the toughest guys, or at least they're carrying around that tough guy image, right? Some of them have been some of the best participants. So it's been good.
I think it's important to note that, as you said, I think this kind of information and training goes to the heart of a lot of the concerns that the public has expressed. But what I really like is that it is not something that is attacking police officer action. What it is doing is reinforcing positive action and
Interaction.
how a lot of things are put in place to help an officer be the best officer they can. And it's not like you're doing it wrong. It's like these are things that can help you do it better. And I think that's a much more successful approach, and I can see why officers would be more receptive to that as a tool rather than as a, what do I say, a chain to hold them back.
Right, it has to be looked at as
Yeah, it has
a
to be.
performance enhancement, not as a knock it off.
Yeah, because I don't think that'll fly very far.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't mention in the list of reasons for suicide, just people feeling guilty. about things that they knew they did or didn't do before.
One of the big
Circumstances
moments,
that you relive, you know, and it's hard for any of us, I think, to let go of a doubt, a self-doubt, or a looking at the consequences of something we did or didn't do. And the, you know, some of the thoughts I was having was that I am sure that a fundamental of your training is to be able to distance yourself emotionally from the situation, yet
That's kind of what we
having
teach
to
ourselves,
get
but it's
past
not,
that.
yeah, it's not
Exactly.
potentially the best way to go about
Yeah.
things.
right. And so it was sort of those things that I was thinking.
You said something in the beginning, I think, maybe, I don't remember it correctly, but I think you said something in the very beginning about empathy. And that, you know, you either walk in with it or you don't.
That's right.
And I think I've said that a number of times when we're bringing in recruits. You know, I'm not really as interested about how many guns that you're proficient in and how fast you can drive a car. I want to know your character, and I want to know the kind of person that's going to be holding that gun and driving that car and interacting with people. And I think empathy comes to the forefront. And when you said that right off the bat, that caught my attention, because
Sure.
you have to recognize that that's a quality that is highly desirable for a public service,
Sure.
period, in any capacity.
Yep.
Fire, police, utilities, anybody. They have to have empathy with the community they serve. And when you said that right off the bat, that caught my attention, because if you don't come in with that, I'm not going to be able to teach that to you. I don't think you can. It's either, you either have it in your character or you don't.
Yep.
But one of your challenges in the recruiting, which we talked about earlier, is if somebody doesn't seem to have it, can you train it into them, or do you leave it out? And correspondingly, if somebody has too much, you're trying to train them to park it.
Well, and sometimes empathy, right, especially the way that some people look at it, some people equate empathy with sympathy, right? And I don't necessarily have to be sympathetic to your situation, but if I have enough empathy, I at least understand where you're at and why you're there and what led to that position, and I can put myself in your shoes and I can understand the decisions that you're making, and then I can respond appropriately, right? It doesn't mean necessarily that I have to be touchy and feely and give everybody a hug. It just means that I understand certain people's life circumstances, right? And it doesn't make them a bad person. It just means that I have an understanding of why they're in the position that they're in. I can put myself in their shoes.
We're going to stop on that note, on that, and I do have empathy, but we're going to stop on that note. This is all great discussion, and we're going to hold it to continue it. And I'm going to adjourn this meeting, and everyone have a good, safe Memorial Weekend. And remember, Click It or Ticket is out there. I've already had 2 calls about Click It or Ticket. And you want to elaborate a little bit on that, where we got the money from that? Did we get some grant money or something, Chief?
We are participating in the state
Right.
program.
Right, okay.
But traffic enforcement's very important on any long extended holiday weekend like it is anytime. But we definitely echo your sentiments, Chair, that we want everybody to have a fun extended
Safe.
Memorial Day weekend, but be safe.
Safe. So I've gotten 2 tickets on, you guys were picking on them. How dare you? But I want everybody to buckle up. They weren't buckled and they were speeding, but you were picking on them. So we just want everybody to be safe, and we don't know where they're going to be, so just drive safe
Yeah.
everywhere.
Don't let your friends try to.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. This meeting's adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, Sergeant Captain.